Chapter 1. The Business Trip That Changed History, August 6, 1945. The city of Hiroshima was waking up to what seemed like another ordinary summer morning. Streetcars rattled along their tracks. Shopkeepers lifted their shutters. Factory workers hurried through the streets. Children prepared for another day of school. The war had already lasted for years. Air raid sirens had become part of everyday life. Yet, on this particular morning, there was an unusual sense of relief. Unlike many other Japanese cities, Hiroshima had escaped the massive bombing campaigns that had destroyed Tokyo, Osaka, and dozens of other urban centers. Many believed the city had simply been fortunate. No one imagined the real reason. Hiroshima had been left untouched because it had become something far more valuable: a target. Among the thousands of people walking through the city that morning was a 29-year-old engineer named Tsutomu Yamaguchi. He worked for Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, designing oil tankers for the Japanese war effort. For the previous 3 months, he had been away from home on a business assignment in Hiroshima. That morning was supposed to be his last. His bags were already packed. His wife and infant son were waiting for him nearly 300 kilometers away in Nagasaki. Within a few hours, he expected to board a train and finally return home. It was an ordinary business trip, one he would remember for the rest of his life. As Yamaguchi walked toward the Mitsubishi shipyard, something suddenly occurred to him. He had forgotten an important document. Some accounts describe it as his identification pass. Others mention paperwork required for his journey home. Whatever it was, he turned around. It was a decision that delayed him by only a few minutes. A delay so small that nobody would have noticed. Yet those few minutes would determine whether he lived or died. At approximately 8:15 that morning, Yamaguchi reached an open area near the shipyard. He looked up. A single aircraft flew high above the city. It was unusual. There were no formations, no air raid, just one lone American bomber crossing the clear blue sky. Its name was the Enola Gay. Few people on the ground paid much attention. One aircraft posed little threat. Japanese civilians had grown accustomed to reconnaissance flights. Then, a small object separated from the airplane. It began falling silently toward the city. No one knew what it was. There was no warning, no explosion. Not yet. Yamaguchi glanced upward one final time, and then the sky exploded into light. Chapter 2. A sun fell from the sky. For a fraction of a second, everything became white. Not bright, not yellow, white. Years later, Tsutomu Yamaguchi would struggle to describe what he had seen. He said it was as if the entire sky had turned into a single flash of light, so intense that it erased every shadow, every color, every detail around him. Then came the heat. It wasn't like standing too close to a fire. It wasn't even like touching boiling metal. It was something beyond ordinary human experience. In less than a second, the temperature near the center of the explosion reached several million degrees Celsius. Although Yamaguchi was nearly 3 kilometers from the point of detonation, the thermal radiation that reached him was still powerful enough to burn exposed skin instantly. He instinctively threw himself to the ground. A moment later, the shockwave arrived. It slammed into him with incredible force. The blast lifted his body from the earth as if he weighed nothing. Windows exploded hundreds of meters away. Roof tiles became deadly projectiles. Wooden buildings collapsed in seconds. The pressure burst both of his eardrums. His face and arms were badly burned. For several moments, he couldn't hear anything except a high-pitched ringing. He didn't even know if he was alive. When he finally opened his eyes, the Hiroshima he had known no longer existed. Buildings that had stood only seconds earlier had simply vanished. Smoke and dust covered the city. Telephone poles leaned at impossible angles. Streetcars had been thrown from their tracks. People wandered silently through the ruins. Many had no idea what had happened. Some stared blankly at their own burned hands. Others stumbled without direction, their clothes torn away by the blast. Many had suffered burns so severe that strips of skin hung from their arms. Some held their hands stretched forward because touching their own bodies had become unbearable. There were no screams at first, only silence. The kind of silence that follows something the human mind cannot yet understand. Yamaguchi tried to stand. Pain shot through his body. His ears were bleeding, his vision blurred. His clothes were scorched. He looked back toward the center of the city. Above Hiroshima, a gigantic cloud was rising. It seemed alive, growing higher every second, twisting into the sky. He had never seen anything like it. No one had. Without realizing it, Tsutomu Yamaguchi had become one of the first human beings in history to witness the effects of an atomic weapon. The bomb that destroyed Hiroshima was called Little Boy. It was unlike any weapon ever used in war. Instead of relying on conventional explosives, it released energy from nuclear fission. At 8:15 that morning, it detonated approximately 600 meters above the city. The explosion unleashed a force equivalent to roughly 15,000 tons of TNT. Within seconds, tens of thousands of people were dead. By the end of 1945, the death toll would rise to well over 100,000 as burns, injuries, and radiation sickness claimed even more lives. But in those first moments, no one understood any of that. The survivors believed they had witnessed the end of the world. Yamaguchi stumbled through the shattered streets, searching desperately for two colleagues who had been traveling with him during the business assignment. Against all odds, he found them. Both men were injured. Both were alive. The three engineers looked at one another in disbelief. None of them could explain what had happened. There were rumors. Some believed an entire squadron of bombers had attacked. Others thought a massive fuel depot had exploded. There was no information, no radios, no officials giving instructions, only chaos. As the day continued, fires spread across the city from every direction. Entire neighborhoods disappeared beneath walls of flame. Those who had survived the blast now faced another enemy: fire. The air itself became difficult to breathe. Ash drifted down from the sky like black snow. Burned paper floated through the streets. The smell of smoke mixed with something far more disturbing: burning wood, burning steel, and burning human flesh. Yamaguchi later admitted that he believed he was going to die there. Yet survival has a remarkable way of changing priorities. His thoughts turned immediately to one place: Nagasaki, his wife, his infant son. If they were still alive, he had to reach them. It seemed impossible. Railway lines had been damaged. Communication had collapsed. Thousands of injured civilians crowded every available road. But somehow, during the following day, emergency rail service resumed on parts of the network. Exhausted, burned, barely able to hear. Tsutomu Yamaguchi boarded a train leaving the ruins of Hiroshima. He carried no clear understanding of what had happened, only the memory of a blinding light, in a city that had disappeared in a single instant. He believed he had escaped the worst disaster imaginable. He had no idea that history was preparing to test him one more time. Chapter 3. Home. Into another nightmare. For nearly 2 days, Tsutomu Yamaguchi lived on instinct. He barely slept. His burns throbbed constantly. Every loud sound made the ringing in his ears even worse. His body ached from the force of the explosion, and his bandages were already stained from the burns that covered much of his upper body. Yet none of that mattered. There was only one thought in his mind: get home. Leaving Hiroshima was almost as unbelievable as surviving the explosion itself. The city had become a wasteland. Entire districts had vanished beneath ash and twisted steel. Thousands of people wandered through the ruins searching for family members who would never answer. Hospitals overflowed with patients, but doctors had little idea how to treat injuries they had never seen before. Many victims appeared stable during the first hours, only to collapse days later for reasons nobody could explain. The invisible effects of radiation were still completely unknown. Yamaguchi could not have known that his body had already absorbed dangerous levels of it. As emergency workers struggled to restore some order, sections of Japan's railway system slowly began operating again. Against every expectation, Tsutomu managed to secure a place on a train heading toward Nagasaki. The journey should have felt like salvation. Instead, it felt like traveling through a country that no longer existed. From the train window, villages passed by in silence. Military checkpoints stood along damaged rail lines. Factories operated with skeleton crews. Passengers spoke in whispers. Everyone sensed the war was reaching its final days. No one imagined just how close the end truly was. Several hours later, Tsutomu Yamaguchi finally arrived home. His wife, Hisako, had spent days worrying about him. Communication between cities had become increasingly unreliable, and after hearing rumors of a massive attack on Hiroshima, she feared the worst. When she saw him, she almost didn't recognize him. His face was swollen, his hair was singed, his arms were wrapped in makeshift bandages, his clothes were torn and stained. He looked less like an engineer returning from a business trip, and more like a man who had escaped hell. For the first time since the explosion, Yamaguchi allowed himself to believe he was safe. He embraced his wife. He held his young son. He was home. The nightmare was over, or so he thought. Despite his condition, Yamaguchi reported to work the very next morning. Japan was still at war. Factories continued operating. Employees were expected to fulfill their duties whenever possible. On the morning of August 9, 1945, only 3 days after Hiroshima, he entered the Mitsubishi shipyard in Nagasaki. His colleagues immediately noticed his injuries. Some gathered around him, asking what had happened. Yamaguchi tried to explain. He described the brilliant flash, the unbearable heat, the explosion, unlike anything he had ever experienced. He told them that an entire city had disappeared in seconds. The room fell silent. Some listened with concern. Others looked skeptical. One of his supervisors reportedly interrupted him. According to later accounts, the response was blunt. "You're exaggerating. One bomb cannot destroy an entire city." It was an understandable reaction. Throughout history, no conventional weapon had ever possessed such destructive power. The idea that a single aircraft carrying a single bomb could erase an entire city sounded impossible, even to experienced engineers. Yamaguchi tried again. He insisted that what he had seen was real, that Hiroshima no longer existed, that thousands of people had vanished, that this was unlike anything mankind had ever created. Then, the room suddenly filled with light. Another flash, another blinding white light, almost identical to the one he had witnessed 3 days earlier. For one impossible moment, Tsutomu Yamaguchi believed he was reliving the same nightmare. Outside, in the sky above Nagasaki, an American B-29 bomber called Boxcar had just released the second atomic bomb ever used in war. Its name was Fat Man. Originally, the mission had been intended for another city, Kokura, but heavy cloud cover obscured the target. Unable to complete the attack there, the bomber turned toward its secondary objective, Nagasaki. A decision made thousands of meters above the ground, one made because of the weather, one that would forever change the fate of an entire city, and place Tsutomu Yamaguchi directly beneath a second nuclear explosion. Once again, the world became white. Chapter 4. The Second Sun. For the second time in less than 72 hours, Tsutomu Yamaguchi saw the world disappear in a flash of white. Instinct took over before thought ever could. The memory of Hiroshima was still painfully fresh. Without even realizing it, his body reacted. He threw himself to the ground. Moments later, the shockwave tore through Nagasaki. Windows exploded inward. Walls cracked. Furniture was hurled across rooms. The force of the blast shook the Mitsubishi office where Yamaguchi had been standing only seconds earlier. Dust filled the air. The deafening roar returned. For an instant, he wondered if he had died. When the dust finally settled, Yamaguchi slowly lifted his head. The building around him had been heavily damaged, but it had also shielded him from the worst of the explosion. Unlike Hiroshima, where he had been outdoors and completely exposed to the thermal flash, solid walls now stood between him and the intense heat. It was a small difference, a difference that may have saved his life. Outside, another city had been transformed into an inferno. At 11:02 that morning, the bomb known as Fat Man exploded nearly 500 meters above Nagasaki. Unlike the uranium bomb dropped on Hiroshima, Fat Man used plutonium. It produced an explosion even more powerful than the first. Within seconds, tens of thousands of people were killed. Entire neighborhoods vanished beneath fire, collapsing buildings, and unimaginable heat. And once again, nobody understood what had happened. Some believed a massive ammunition depot had exploded. Others thought multiple bombing raids had struck the city simultaneously. No one imagined that humanity had entered the nuclear age. As Yamaguchi staggered outside, a terrible thought struck him. His wife, his son, their home. He had survived. But had they? Ignoring his own injuries, he began making his way through streets that had become almost impossible to recognize. Smoke covered the sky. Telephone poles lay across shattered roads. Fires spread from house to house. People wandered in shock, covered in dust and burns. Many called the names of loved ones. Others simply stared into the distance, unable to process what they were seeing. Every step became more difficult. His burns from Hiroshima had barely begun to heal. Now he was walking through another city destroyed by another atomic bomb. The odds were beyond comprehension. Twice in 3 days, twice within a few kilometers of the deadliest weapon ever created. As he approached the neighborhood where his family lived, fear overwhelmed him. He expected to find nothing. No house, no voices, no signs of life. Instead, he heard someone calling his name. It was Hisako. Against every probability, she had survived. Even more remarkably, their young son was alive as well. Earlier that morning, Hisako had left home to search for medicine to treat her husband's burns. That simple errand had delayed her just enough to avoid the full force of the explosion inside their house. Once again, minutes had made the difference between life and death. The family embraced amid the destruction surrounding them. There was no celebration, only relief. They had survived, but survival did not mean safety. In the days that followed, a mysterious illness began spreading among many of the survivors. People who had appeared healthy suddenly developed high fevers. Others began vomiting uncontrollably. Hair fell out in clumps. Purple spots appeared beneath the skin. Some died without visible injuries. Doctors were overwhelmed. They had never encountered anything like it. There was no treatment because there was no understanding. Radiation sickness was a concept almost entirely unknown. Yamaguchi himself became dangerously ill. His burns became infected. His fever rose. His hearing, already damaged in Hiroshima, deteriorated even further. For days, it seemed entirely possible that the explosions had merely delayed his death. Yet somehow, his body endured. Weeks passed, then months. Japan surrendered on August 15, 1945. For millions of Japanese citizens, the emperor's radio broadcast announcing the end of the war marked the beginning of an uncertain future. For Tsutomu Yamaguchi, the war had already ended twice, not with speeches, not with treaties, but with 2 blinding flashes that had changed his life forever. He would eventually recover enough to return to work. He would rebuild a life with his family. But there was one question that would follow him for decades. How could one man survive the destruction of Hiroshima, escape, travel home, and then survive Nagasaki as well? Many called it luck. Others called it fate. Tsutomu Yamaguchi himself rarely used either word, because surviving did not mean escaping the consequences. Chapter 5. The Luckiest Man, or the Unluckiest. When the war finally ended, Japan began rebuilding from ruins unlike anything the world had ever seen. Entire cities had disappeared. Millions of families had lost loved ones. The country itself had been transformed forever. For Tsutomu Yamaguchi, however, the greatest battle was only beginning. The burns on his skin slowly healed. The cuts closed. His broken body recovered enough for him to return to work. But there were wounds that medicine could not repair. The radiation he had absorbed in Hiroshima and again in Nagasaki would remain inside his body for the rest of his life. In the months after the bombings, Yamaguchi suffered from persistent fatigue. His hair fell out. His injuries healed slowly. His hearing never fully recovered. Doctors could treat the symptoms, but they still knew almost nothing about the long-term effects of radiation. The survivors of the atomic bombings became known in Japan as hibakusha, a word that literally means bomb-affected people. At first, many believed survival itself was enough. But as the years passed, another tragedy emerged. Thousands of hibakusha faced discrimination. Some employers refused to hire them, fearing they were too sick to work. Others believed radiation was contagious. Young survivors often struggled to find spouses because families feared future children would be born with disabilities. Many chose to remain silent about what they had experienced, not because they wanted to forget, but because speaking about it often made life even harder. Tsutomu Yamaguchi was one of them. For decades, he rarely discussed what had happened. He focused on raising his family. He continued working as an engineer. He lived what appeared to be an ordinary life. Yet every August, the memories returned. 2 mornings, 2 cities, 2 flashes. 2 moments that had divided his life forever into a before and an after. As the decades passed, Japan transformed into one of the world's leading economies. New skyscrapers rose. Bullet trains crossed the country at incredible speeds. Children played in parks built where ruins had once stood. Hiroshima and Nagasaki became vibrant cities again. Visitors walked their streets with little sign of the devastation that had once consumed them. But for those who had been there, the past never truly disappeared. In the early 2000s, Yamaguchi finally decided that his story could no longer remain private. He realized that the generation who had witnessed the bombings was growing older. Soon, there would be no one left to tell the world what nuclear war actually looked like through human eyes. He began giving interviews, speaking at schools, meeting journalists, not to describe himself as a miracle, but as a witness. He repeatedly said that no one should ever experience what he had lived through. His message was remarkably simple. Nuclear weapons should never be used again. Then, in 2009, more than 60 years after the war had ended, the Japanese government officially recognized Tsutomu Yamaguchi as a double hibakusha, the first person formally acknowledged as having survived both the Hiroshima and Nagasaki atomic bombings. There were other people who had traveled between the 2 cities and survived both attacks. Historians estimate that more than 100 individuals may have experienced both bombings. But Yamaguchi became the first to receive official recognition after providing extensive documentation of his movements and experiences. The title brought him international attention. Newspapers around the world published his story. Television crews visited his home. People everywhere asked the same question. How could one man survive 2 atomic bombs? Some called him the luckiest man who ever lived. Others believed he was among the unluckiest. Perhaps, neither description was entirely true, because surviving is not the same as escaping. Every scar on his body carried the memory of those 3 days in August 1945. Every anniversary reminded him of the thousands who never returned home. Every interview forced him to relive moments most people could never imagine. Yet despite everything, he never allowed hatred to define his life. He did not dedicate his final years seeking revenge. He dedicated them to remembrance. On January 4th, 2010, Tsutomu Yamaguchi died at the age of 93 after battling stomach cancer. His family was by his side. The war that had followed him for more than 6 decades was finally over. Today, visitors to Hiroshima Peace Memorial Park often stop before the atomic bomb dome. Others travel to Nagasaki's Peace Park. They read the names of those who were lost. They look at photographs of cities erased in seconds. And somewhere among those countless stories is the life of a quiet engineer who never sought fame. A man who simply wanted to finish a business trip, return home to his wife, and watch his son grow up. Instead, history chose him to witness 2 of humanity's darkest mornings, not as a soldier, not as a politician, not as a scientist, but as an ordinary man who survived the impossible.